What is up, everybody? Welcome to the reveal of the number 16 team in my 2020 NFL Power Rankings with a deep dive into the LA Rams. Before we hop in, a quick reminder, please do hit that like button down below. Really helps me out, helps support this channel, helps this video get more views, so I appreciate you in advance for that. So the Rams come in here 16th, which is certainly a team many of you have been anticipating to show up in these power rankings within the last 5 or 6 episodes or so. Definitely a lot of people low on this Rams team, which hints that I'm actually higher on this Rams team than a lot of people here for 2020, which is surprising for me to sit here and say, although maybe not so surprising given the overreaction theater that we tend to see out there. You know, last year I ranked this team 9th, which was much lower than the general public had the defending NFC champions. I said there was a lot of reasons that this team could regress, from quarterback play to offensive line to a lack of depth due to less salary space. And sure enough, that all came to fruition. But at the end of the day, this is still a very talented team with a ton of superstars on it, an excellent head coach in Sean McVay, an established culture, and there's a lot of reasons this team can still contend this year. So it's going to be a great team to go through, talk of course about the impact some of these top stars on this team can have, how far they can push this team, but also who are the new pieces here? What depth might step up, as this team's depth has certainly fallen off over the last year or two, which tends to happen when you pay your quarterback as much as this team had to pay Jared Goff, and you have good players getting opportunities elsewhere for more money. So we'll go through the roster, we'll rank each position, how they stack up against the rest of the league. While we do that, I will be showing you my custom Madden roster. I realize it is a video game, but it's an excellent copyright-free graphic that I get to use to show you how I perceive each player. They are my own ratings, so keep that in mind. Then we're going to take a look at this team's schedule, their Vegas over-under, and my win total expectations for this team. So let's get into it, starting with the offensive coach and culture before we get into the roster here. So they are going to rank relatively high here, 10th for overall coach and culture, 6th for offensive coach and culture, and 20th for defensive coach and culture. So I'm actually expecting a decent amount of change in the way this team looks schematically this year. You know, Sean McVay was really well recognized for what he accomplished in 2018, but ultimately what he did was took the Kyle Shanahan scheme that we've now learned is just phenomenal and being replicated all around the league, and put his own little spin on it, but really used the same concepts with a lot of play action, outside zones, moving pockets, and vertical shots or deep horizontal crossing shots through the play action. And he really maximized that in 2018. But the reality is, as this Rams team dominated with it, and teams around the league like the Niners, Packers, Titans, Vikings have really started to focus on that scheme, teams are adapting. And I do think Sean McVay, as a brilliant young mind, I don't think he's a copycat coach. I think he has a very good grasp on the scheme that he learned from Kyle Shanahan, but I think he's also very forward thinking, and he is going to mix in some newer concepts this year. I think he's well aware of the fact that he can't just keep giving the same trick over and over again. He's going to have to adapt, and I fully expect him to come out with something. Now, I can't sit here from my desk in Minneapolis and tell you what that is, but I still have great expectations that Sean McVay will implement, of course, the core fundamental principles of his scheme, but mix in some change as well. So I'm giving this team the benefit of the doubt in that regard. And I expect the offensive coaching here to be fantastic, ranking 6th. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you know, you have a lot of similar pieces in place. You have leaders like Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, and I expect a lot of the schematics to look similar here in what we expect to be a 3-4 defense again. But of course, Wade Phillips is on his way out here. They're going with defensive coordinator Brandon Staley. And Staley is a Vic Fangio disciple. He was with Fangio in Chicago as the linebackers coach, worked with Khalil Mack, went to Denver, worked with Von Miller under Vic Fangio, and now they're going to be coming over to LA and implementing that same 3-4 scheme, which is going to rely on getting some good pressures with 4-man rushes and a good healthy combination of coverages on the back end. And I think while it's still a 3-4 defense, I do think simplifying this scheme a little bit, which I would say the Fangio scheme is a little more simplistic, less exotic than what Wade Phillips was trying to do, basically trying to win games with this defense, going all out. I think this team can have a much more healthy balance. Now that this is a thinner defense, I don't think it's ever going to be an elite defense, but simplifying things, making things easier on some more of the younger players here that are going to have to step up, I think can be beneficial and keep the score down and let Sean McVay and this offense carry this team to some more wins. Not carry, but put them in a great position to win games. So I do like the direction of the team here. I'm excited to see what Brandon Staley, who's learned under one of the best defensive minds in the game, and Vic Fangio, is going to do with this defense that has a lot of upside. So that's more time than we spent on the scheme and the coaching here, but obviously ranking this team 16th, you got to acknowledge kind of the culture here and what Sean McVay has established. And yes, they've lost some names. They had some questionable moves over the offseason that we're going to hit in on now that we go through the roster, but they still have an excellent establishment here. As far as the organization, I have a lot of confidence in that to at least make this team a high-level competitor. So let's start talking about the players with the quarterback here. Jared Goff going to rank 18th. To me, Jared Goff is what he is. I'm not expecting some crazy mental development from him now in year 5. I think early on, Goff got a little bit too much credit as this offense was really wheeling and dealing. A lot of people had him up in the top 10 range. I was never on board with that. He just doesn't have it from a processor standpoint. He is kind of the definition of a first-read quarterback, but in this scheme, he's perfect. It's a lot of the things we talked about with Ryan Tannehill. It's a big reason Kirk Cousins has had a lot of success in Minnesota with this same scheme. They're all very similar quarterbacks in that they have fantastic arms. They have great deep ball placement. Some of the best looking deep balls in general. Just those magnificent 40-yard shots that put the ball right in stride with a receiver running a crossing route like Goff, Cousins, Tannehill. These guys can do that at a very high level from a clean pocket or, in this scheme's case, a moving pocket. So that is Jared Goff's best skill set. He's a fantastic arm, great ball placement downfield, and Sean McVay leverages that very well. Now, there's obvious problems with Jared Goff's game as well. He doesn't sense pressure and use the little athleticism he does have to, manipulate the pocket and use his feet to extend plays. He's not particularly sharp after his first read. You don't really know what you're going to get when the pressure does get in and you can't scheme things up for him. At the end of the day, Sean McVay basically lives vicariously through Jared Goff's arm talent, and that counts for something. That's why they're going to rank 18th. He was the number 1 pick in the draft for a reason. He has all of the tools in the world, but when you go against great defenses, as we've seen throughout Jared Goff's career, he's really not going to elevate the coaching staff. He's not going to elevate the players around him. He is going to live or die through the scheme here. He is the definition of a system quarterback in that way. Was he worth the money they paid him? I definitely don't think so. Can they win with Jared Goff? Yes, they definitely can. It's just going to be extremely difficult, especially now that he's on one of the more expensive contracts in the league. When they got to the Super Bowl, he was still on a rookie deal, and that's why they were able to put so much help around him. And now we've seen the offensive line fall off and the defense fall off. So it's going to be very, very difficult. You're going to need a lot of other guys to step up here. And that's a great transition as we move forward into the rest of the roster. There's no backups here worth a damn. John Wolford, Bryce Perkins, Josh Love. Perkins and Love are interesting athletes, undrafted rookies. I bet one of those guys will beat up John Wolford, but I have very low expectations for either of them. I do know some people that like Josh Love, so do keep an eye on him. His tape was solid. He throws a really good football. So let's talk about the running back room here. This is really interesting. I nailed it last year. I said that Todd Gurley was going to be a non-factor here, that contract was just a miserable mistake, and that the signs were all there down the stretch that he just was never going to be the same guy. And sure enough, he wasn't. He was fine. But you don't pay a fine running back that you can find basically anywhere, $15-16 million. So they end up releasing him. They do take some dead cap on that, but it opened up the door here for some better athletes, and I ultimately think that's what you have here. You really run 4 deep of guys that I like. So you do have Cam Akers, who they spent a second-round pick on. A lot of people are going to anticipate that he will be the lead back here. It would make sense. This team clearly likes him. I was not super high on Cam Akers. I thought this was a pretty early pick for him in the second round, especially when you spent a third on Darrell Henderson last year, who I thought was a better college prospect than Cam Akers and brought a lot of the same skill sets as far as that explosive element out of the backfield. And then you have Malcolm Brown, who's been very solid. You can make a case over the last 20 games here for the Rams that he's been as good, if not better, than Todd Gurley. And then you have John Kelly, a sixth-round pick, who just this team doesn't seem to like. I do kind of understand it because in this outside zone scheme, you're really putting an emphasis on more of the burst to the outside, the home run threat through outside zones. That's going to be guys more like Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, not necessarily John Kelly, who's more of that inside zone, patient, shiftier, fight for 2 or 3 tough yards kind of guy, as opposed to hit the home run on a well-blocked outside zone. So I actually think this team is going to shift to very much a hot hand running back by committee approach. I do think they'll give Cam Akers that opportunity early. Now, I don't want to act like I hate Cam Akers. There was obvious flashes from him, and he wasn't playing in an ideal situation at Florida State. That program has been just a train wreck over the last couple years, and it's tough to have a good run game if you're not all on the same page. So I do see the upside in Cam Akers. I just didn't fully understand drafting him in the second round when you have a lot of lack of depth on this roster as a whole. And I like Darrell Henderson quite a bit. I think he can be dare I say, top 10 running back in this scheme. I mean, we've seen a guy like C.J. Anderson produce at a very high level here when this offense was clicking. So I do rank them 26th for running back just because all these guys are pretty unproven and Malcolm Brown's just kind of a low-end starter. But I think they're going to be just fine at this position. I think all of these guys can do a little bit of everything, too, as far as being receivers out of the backfield as well. So I don't have anything really bad to say other than I don't necessarily think Cam Akers was a good pick in the second round. But I think they're going to get the job done and do a good job within this scheme, even though they rank 26th. But let's talk about the receiver room. I think this is a reason I'm a little bit higher on this team. I think a lot of people see the Brandon Cooks departure and think that there's nobody else here, which couldn't be further from the truth. They have a ton of depth. There's 3 or maybe even 4 or 5 deep at wide receiver. We'll talk about that group, but they're also 2 deep at tight end, 3 deep if you like Bryson Hopkins, who was my number 1 tight end this year. So they've got a ton of talent here. They do rank 17th because they don't have that high-end number 1 guy. But let's start with the receivers here and highlight why there is a decent amount of talent in this room. Robert Woods is a fantastic wide receiver. I think you could make a case he's the best number 2 receiver in the league, if that makes sense. Like, he just doesn't have the elite physical tools. He's kind of a jack of all trades, close to a master of everything, but not a master of any one thing. Like, he is just super versatile. He can play outside, can play in the slot. He's good after the catch. He's good at getting open. He has good ball skills. He's just above average at every single trait. Even his size profile is like solid. So I really like what you have in Robert Woods. And then you have Cooper Kupp, who is perfect in this scheme. Like, he's going to flex in really close to the line of scrimmage. He blocks his ass off. He releases off the line of scrimmage. He's a stud after the catch. He catches everything. Think of how like Larry Fitzgerald is used at times as kind of half tight end, as that slot wide receiver. Like, Sean McVay utilizes him so well as that. Kind of finding the perfect landing spot for Cooper Kupp, who's not a burner by any stretch of the imagination, but just a guy that Jared Goff can rip an accurate 15-yard skinny post to, or chuck it to on a crosser off of play action. Like, he's perfect in this scheme. So he's a great weapon. Josh Reynolds is the guy that's probably going to have to step up here. This team has traditionally run a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. I do think we'll see a bit of a stemming off of that, maybe more 2 tight end looks here to diversify the play calling here a little bit. But Josh Reynolds, a very good 3rd wide receiver. I like his ball skills. He is faster for a taller wide receiver. Like, I'm not a huge Josh Reynolds guy, but he's very solid. But there are 2 names, rookie names here that I love. So Van Jefferson, this team spent a 2nd round pick on. I fully expect that if he's healthy, he's going to beat out Josh Reynolds for that number 3 wide receiver spot. I loved Van Jefferson's tape. His speed was getting underrated. He looked like the college version of Keenan Allen, who, remember, fell to the 3rd round. And I very strongly believe in that comp. Keenan Allen even had injury questions, just as Van Jefferson has. His release off the line of scrimmage is pure. He has good enough ball skills. Excellent route runner. And the combination of him and Brycen Hopkins, skipping ahead a little bit, hints a little more at me thinking that Sean McVay wants some more guys here that are better at creating by themselves. Because when I look at like Woods and Kupp, to me they're not guys that win a ton against single coverage as far as route running and creating separation. But when I look at Brycen Hopkins and Van Jefferson, that kind of hints a little bit more towards Sean McVay saying, I want some more diversity here with guys that are going to be better route runners that can create some better separation on more traditional passing concepts here. So I love that pick. And then the 5th guy I need to mention here is Tristan Jackson. Those that have been around this channel know I'm a huge Tristan Jackson fan. I had a 4th round grade on him in a very deep wide receiver class. It's my opinion that he was being slept on in a deep wide receiver class. He was my 17th wide receiver, which doesn't sound like much, but you guys know for the most part this receiver class was loaded. So Tristan Jackson reminds me a lot of a guy that broke out last year, a 5th round pick in Darius Slayton. I think the best case scenario for him, think Robbie Anderson. So long, lengthy speedster with good enough ball skills, but really kind of a one-trick pony, but that one trick being a very valuable asset, and that is the ability to run a go ball and make it very difficult for guys to catch up with him. Now, within this scheme, I'm picturing him translating that speed into getting open on deep crossers and post routes a lot off of play action, if he is to get on the field here, of course. You know, not elite after the catch, but he does have a good release. He does enough with slants, ins and outs, more simple concepts in the short game to keep defensive backs honest and really can make that deep threat a threat. So I do like Tristan Jackson. I was stunned that he went undrafted, so I thought that was a great pickup. I think this receiver room has a ton of depth that is getting kind of slept on. So they rank 17th again. And then you have 2 tight ends that are really worth talking about here. So Tyler Higbee is a very solid starter, a good blocker, a good receiver, a good run after catch threat, just above average at pretty much everything. And then you have Gerald Everett in a contract year here. I actually expect pretty big things from Everett. He is going to be more of that mismatch problem. A very speedy tight end has really come on lately, especially as a blocker. And I think his emergence is what has let this team go with more 2 tight end sets and will allow that trend to continue moving forward. So I like Gerald Everett a lot. I think he could be a huge breakout candidate this year. And then you have Brycen Hopkins, was my number 1 tight end in this class. And I didn't love the scheme fit because, like I said, this offense really does a lot of scheming up these tight ends. And Hopkins isn't an elite athlete. He's not a great blocker to help you sell the play action or anything like that. But he reminded me a lot of Zach Ertz, who is not known for his blocking. But what he is excellent at is being a deceptive route runner who's also really good after the catch. I see that in Brycen Hopkins. So kind of like I said with Van Jefferson and Brycen Hopkins, I think if you want a long-term answer, an option to get a little more traditional, have a tight end that could be a good route runner and really shake safeties and linebackers, maybe on a stick and nod route or a corner route, or have the awareness to sit down when running a drag. That to me is Brycen Hopkins. I think he's a guy that can really develop here. I don't think we see much of him as a rookie, but definitely someone you want to keep an eye on for the future, especially because I don't anticipate this team being able to retain Gerald Everett. But I did like that pick at the end of the day. So a lot of depth here in this receiving room. It is pretty wild, though, how much it drops off. But, I mean, that's 8 deep of capable receivers, in my opinion. So it doesn't really matter that Nasimba Webster and Greg Dortch are more kick returners here. I think this receiver room is definitely going to help this team win some games next year, even though they rank 17th. But there's a lot of good receiving cores in the league right now. And then the offensive line, this is going to be a bit of a concern. I think they'll be better next year than they were last year. And I really warned people that this offensive line was not going to be good last year and that it could lead to this team disappointing, and it did. But I did not anticipate the right tackle, Rob Havenstein, going from one of the best right tackles in the league to one of the worst. I think that was a over-swing back to the medium here with Rob Havenstein. I think he'll bounce back and at least be a capable starter at right tackle. I mean, last year was a liability. I don't anticipate that happening again. He got a massive contract for a reason here. By the way, this offensive line is going to rank 21st, so it's not ideal, but you've got some hope here. So Andrew Whitworth at left tackle is coming back again, and my God, he was one of the best, if not the best, left tackles in football again last year. The ageless wonder here. He's like the Frank Gore of tackles, except for he's still elite at his position. It's pretty remarkable. I did not anticipate Andrew Whitworth coming back again, but they're very, very lucky to have him. He signed a 3-year deal this offseason, so I don't think he's got any signs of slowing down. I'm done betting against him, certainly. And then the one thing I will say about the interior group here, because they're not very good, they will have continuity. And I think especially on the interior, you see if you keep the same group intact and they're all like relatively good athletes and smart players, like eventually they're going to develop together. And I think that's going to happen. So especially at center and right guard, you're probably going to have Brian Allen and Austin Blythe again. It was not ideal last year, and it's still going to hurt this team, especially with interior pressure. But I do expect them to grow together. And then left guard, right now it's set to be Austin Corbett, who started a lot of games for this team last year. But you've got options too, with a lot of depth here. So if Allen or Corbett don't emerge as starters here, you have a lot of names that could potentially step up. So Bobby Evans started a lot of games at right tackle for this team last year and was okay, but I think he's a guy that could certainly compete at left guard. You have Joseph Joel Noteboom, third-round pick in 2018, who has not been able to establish himself as a starting caliber player, but certainly a guy with a physical profile that could get there. They spent a 7th-round pick on Tremaine Akram. And you have David Edwards, a 5th-round pick out of Wisconsin that I like. So you have about 9 deep of potential starters here, I will say, from left guard through. I'm pretty confident in Austin Blythe to be a solid right guard, but really left guard and center is going to be a major question mark here. But I do like that you've got about 5 guys kind of competing here, and you've got some continuity. So again, I think you're going to see some natural development here. In addition to the fact that McVay, through this scheme, does a great job to hide some of these guys' warts. And he just gets good athletes that can create these moving pockets that really can neutralize some of their weaknesses as pass blockers. So that was a pretty optimistic outlook for this team on the offensive line. I, again, expect some natural development here with the same guys intact. That said, if they want to go traditional pass sets and they get in a lot of 3rd and 9s with Jared Goff getting pressured from the interior a lot, I don't expect it to look all that pretty. Hence why the offense here is going to rank 16th, smack dab in the middle. I think there's a lot of good elements on this team, from the receivers to some physical talent with Jared Goff to some pieces on the offensive line, and then of course with Sean McVay being able to leverage the strengths of this team that I expect to continue. But there are a lot of weaknesses here as well that I think we covered between Jared Goff and the offensive line that are going to be difficult to hide depending on certain matchups. And then the defensive side of the ball is going to rank 20th. You're going to have a much different looking defense this year, but I think if all things go well, you could as well have a top 16 defense. So while that might potentially not be a Super Bowl team, if you can have a top 16 offense, a top 16 defense, that's going to be a really solid, steady team, which is basically what I'm expecting for this team, ranking them right in the middle at 16. And we'll get into the Super Bowl talk and the Vegas over-under and all that stuff. But let's talk about the players on the defense. So we're going to start with the run defense. Excellent run defense. I mean, this defensive line, obviously you have Aaron Donald, who's the best player in the NFL, if you just take positional value out of it. And then you have a lot of depth around him. A'Shawn Robinson, Michael Brockers, Sebastian Joseph Day, and Greg Gaines, 2 young players that are very much serviceable, if not above average, stopping the run. So you run 5 deep on this interior defensive line. That's really all you need. They don't have a lot of names after those 5, but I'm not worried about that. And then on the linebacker group, that is going to hurt this run defense, because if they had better linebackers and edge guys here, it would probably be a top 5, top 3 run defense, because that defensive line is just fantastic. But, you've got on the edge 2 really kind of undersized edge players in Samson Ebukam and Leonard Floyd. You have a lot of depth of, guys that are going to rotate and compete, but none of them are fantastic edge defenders here. Between Agbanya Okoronkwo, Josh Carraway, Terrell Lewis, a third-round pick, who we'll talk about more as a pass rusher, Ja'Kai Polite. A lot of these guys are good athletes and intriguing pieces to move around, but I don't expect being phenomenal run defenders on the edge of this defense. And then the linebacker group is really poor. We'll talk about them when we get to the linebacker ranking, but run defense is going to rank 8th, because I do trust the front, really 3 of this unit, to just dominate at the line of scrimmage, which is going to make the job much easier on these guys at the second level, even if they aren't great players. And then you get to the pass rush here, which is going to rank 8th. And I think this might be the element of this team that people sleep on the most, and that is the impact that Aaron Donald can have on this defense. Like I said, he is the best player in the NFL, and you really can't disregard that. Him alone makes this a top 10 pass rush, because you have to double team him. And I'm not saying that in a cute way, like, you talk about Chris Jones, Fletcher Cox, or even the guys on the edge, where you're like, oh, you got to double team this guy, because if you don't, he's going to win that one-on-one matchup. Well, yeah, like 50% of the time, 40, 30%, I don't know the numbers. Aaron Donald, if you don't double team him, he's winning that 100% of the time. And from the interior, if you're going to win at the rate that Aaron Donald wins on the interior, it's a cheat code, because he's just as fast as a lot of these edge rushers, but he's twice as close, and the quarterback can't just step up in the pocket. It's unbelievable what Aaron Donald can do. But if you double team him, you can neutralize him a little bit. But we're talking about, you have to double team him every single play, and the defense knows that that's going to happen. So you can scheme up stunts around him, knowing that he's going to attract that attention. So he makes more of an impact on the game than anybody non-quarterback in the NFL. So you really can't sleep on that. That's the biggest reason this ranks 8th, but you've got some pieces around here. So you have some other guys on the interior, Brockers, A'Shawn Robinson. They're not great pass rushers, but they are going to get single-teamed every single time. Brockers and Robinson, they can occasionally win from the interior. It's funny that we started with the interior. This is the only team that will do that. The edge guys here are just not particularly good pass rushers. Ebukam, Leonard Floyd. Now, the nice thing here is we mentioned schemes, blitzing schemes. These are 2 of the best edge players if you want to loop inside. So they're going to do some really interesting things this year, I think. Knowing that Donald's going to demand a double team, you've got other good interior guys. I do think that even though this scheme has traditionally done a lot of 4-man looks, they're going to get creative to manufacture sacks and pressures with these athletic edge guys between Leonard Floyd and Samson Ebukam. Now, Terrell Lewis, a 3rd-round pick here. This guy could be an X factor for this team from a pass rushing point of view. Dude's explosive. Simply put, if he could have stayed healthy, he would have been a 1st-round pick. And the guy I like to compare him to is Carl Lawson, who came out of Auburn but fell into the 4th round because of injury concerns. And that's the same thing with Terrell Lewis. But Lawson's been a fantastic high-end number 2 edge player for the Cincinnati Bengals. You could very easily get that with Terrell Lewis, who has get-off, length, speed, burst, strength, technique. He's a really good football player. I thought this was potentially their best pick in the entire draft. So do keep an eye on Terrell Lewis. He could be a guy that pushes this up into the top 5, because if he's consistently getting single-teamed, which is going to happen, and he can become a really good high-end number 2 pass rusher for this team, that's going to make this defense much more scary. Behind those 3 guys on the edge between Floyd, Lewis, and Ebukam, you don't really have much. You've got Agbanya Okoronkwo. You have Ja'Kai Polite, another guy that was at a time considered a 1st-round pick, but he's a low work ethic guy. I don't expect much from him, but there's some untapped potential in there with Ja'Kai Polite. who's now on his third team in like less than a year, maybe. Being a third-round pick last year for the Jets, so pretty crazy how unwanted he is around the league, but there's something in there. I did forget to mention Justin Lawler, who could be a rotational fourth as a pass rusher, but not going to change the game at all. I just don't want any Justin Lawler truthers coming out and saying I forgot to mention him. But yeah, the edge depth just isn't very good. But again, the pass rush is still going to be ranked 8th, and it's going to help this defense, especially against poor interior offensive lines with Aaron Donald in there. Now, the linebacker group here is dead last in the league. It's pretty crazy how little they seem to care about who their linebackers are here. So they let Littleton go here in free agency and didn't do a whole lot to address it. Now, you do got to keep in mind John Johnson missed most of last season for injury, and he plays a ton of linebacker for this team. But the way I do this, he'll factor into the coverage secondary ranking. The actual linebackers here, you have Micah Keyzer, was a fifth-round pick that I liked out of Virginia. A really heady player, and I think he can actually emerge as this team's number one linebacker. Next to Kenny Young here, who they traded from Baltimore. I can see a world where with the linebacker, the defensive line in front of these guys, they're able to operate in the short area of the field and be a serviceable linebacker core, but you're just projecting a lot from guys that we haven't seen it from. So Kenny Young and Micah Keyzer are really the guys I'm looking at. And then you have a couple of 7th-round picks over the last few years. Trevon Howard, who's a converted safety out of TCU. A similar mold, however, to Cory Littleton, who was more of a safety at Oregon. So they're hoping maybe he can take that career trajectory. Unlikely, but possible. Clay Johnston, a 7th-round pick out of Baylor. You have Troy Reeder, who's gotten some opportunities here. It's really just a lot of unproven meh at the linebacker spot. It's why they rank 32nd. I do think they do some nice things, though, on the back end. With John Johnson that I expect to continue with a new defensive coordinator here to neutralize this team's impact or lack thereof in coverage. And I think that the strength of the front three is going to open things up and make things easier on these guys in run defense, which could get these guys to play above that 32nd ranking. So there is that at least. So then we've got the secondary ranking, which is going to rank 7th. So you do have a top 8 pass rush and a top 7 secondary, which is a recipe for success on the defensive side of the ball, despite some of the lack of depth that this team has. So the corner room, obviously, of Jalen Ramsey. And I think in a scheme here that, as I mentioned, might become more zone heavy, he's going to play up to his billing of being one of the 2 or 3 best corners in the league. He had that fear factor, one of the best player defensive resume when he was in Jacksonville. I think that will be restored here with a scheme that I think can tune to Jalen Ramsey's skill set a little more. And then you've got some pretty interesting depth at the corner room that I actually kind of like. So between Troy Hill and David Long, I like these guys. I think they're really quick players. They're heady. They can run man coverage. They can run zone coverage. Both of these guys are kind of similar to Kyle Fuller in Chicago, who isn't, they're not long, lengthy corners, but they have good ball skills, they have good quickness, good route recognition. They do have the athleticism to run man coverage when they want to. So I think this cornerback room, even Jalen Ramsey, who's definitely a better zone cover than man corner, he can man guys up, even if he's not elite at it. So this secondary gives you a ton of flexibility. And then the slot corner position is going to be a battle for me between David Long and Darius Williams, who showed some really nice flashes. Both in the preseason last year where he looked really impressive, but more importantly, obviously, down the stretch last season, he got on the field, actually played a lot of outside corner, but he's an interesting player. This team claimed him from waivers from Baltimore. He was a guy that I liked coming out of college, coming out of UAB, who was just kind of that scrappy, instinctive slot corner. So he's another kind of breakout candidate, some depth on this team that I think you can definitely keep an eye on, especially being used in more of a starting slot corner position. I think he could seriously emerge as a good slot corner in this league. So you're 4 deep at corner. Serious lack of depth after that. It's a theme with this team. They just don't have the money to bring in a lot of veterans here. But then on the back end with the safeties, it's a good, not great group. So you have John Johnson, who is a big player returning from injury. This team missed him last year on the back end as that sort of strong safety box linebacker. Now they got Cory Littleton to step up and play well in coverage with John Johnson leaving, but I think with Littleton leaving now, you're going to be able to get John Johnson to step in to a lot of that linebacker coverage role as well. So I like what you have in him. Keep in mind, he took over for Justin Simmons at Boston College, played the same role as a very similar player, as a guy that doesn't have great top-end speed, but has great short area quickness, can man guys up, man up tight ends, man up linebackers, has a little bit of range, good ball skills. Like, he is an excellent run defender. So I like John Johnson a lot as a versatile safety here. And then Taylor Rapp in year 2 here, kind of the similar profile, like not an elite athlete at all, but super instinctive, heady player, superb ball skills. I think if these guys just kind of stay in their lane, understand who they are, and don't get over aggressive, don't let their lack of speed put them in compromising situations by taking too many gambles where you could end up a step late, and when you're already a step slower than a lot of these receivers, it can really look bad if you aren't athletic on the back end. But I think both these guys are pretty good exceptions to the rule as far as having speed on the back end, and they're really heady and can limit that weakness. And their backups are pretty similar as well. Jordan Fuller, a 6th-round pick out of Ohio State, very similar to what we just said. Now, he played a lot of traditional free safety, and I think with how this team is going to use John Johnson in the box, Fuller is going to have to step up, either him or Nick Scott, a 7th-round pick out of Penn State, as the free safety in dime looks here, where you're going to have 3 safety packages. Fuller is 100% a capable center fielding safety. He just doesn't really have that high-end upside because he's not particularly fast. But he can do a good job of staying disciplined, coming off the bench as a rookie, and potentially limiting some big plays. Even if he's going to give up some space back there, I think he's at least going to limit big plays and huge chunks. And then Terrell Burgess, a 3rd-round pick. I mentioned Fuller before Burgess because I think Fuller has a clearer path to the field given his skill set. I think Burgess is a little more redundant with Rapp and Johnson. Played much more of that strong safety role in a traditional cover 3 defense. So I think that room is a little crowded in sort of that slot strong safety spot between Johnson. I think Rapp will play some of that stuff as well. And then Darius Williams being the nickel corner potentially ahead of Terrell Burgess. But a guy that certainly was entering the NFL ready to go, playing in that really well-coached Utah defense, ran almost exclusively zone coverage. So I think they got 2 really smart defensive backs here in the draft that can come in and not embarrass themselves early. Now, I don't think either of these guys have crazy high upsides, but I think those were smart picks given they took some risks earlier with guys like Lewis and Van Jefferson, 2 guys with major injury questions, and Cam Akers, who you're banking on developing at the next level. I think they did a good job at the back end of their draft here, recognizing their lack of depth in the secondary and finding some guys that can fill it out, especially in that safety room. Now, I think you also want to keep an eye on Juju Hughes out of Fresno State as an undrafted safety that I could definitely see making this team as a 5th or 6th safety. So there's your roster review. Again, they're going to come in 16th for offense, 20th for defense. I see 2 very solid units, but 2 units that certainly have weaknesses as well. And when you have sort of that yin and yang, if you will, consistency is going to be a problem for this team. I think there's going to be weeks where it looks a little ugly here, where the pass rush gets in, the offense can't do much. There's going to be weeks where teams find a way to block Aaron Donald and the rest of this defense doesn't really get elevated from the impact Donald has on games, and they look like more of a bottom 12 defense or so. But this team has some real strengths as well, and in certain matchups, this team's going to kick some ass this year. So we're going to wrap up, talk about this team's schedule here. Vegas has them at 8.5 wins, so they're actually staying pretty stubborn. They think this team's going to be pretty solid. I obviously agree. They're in a very tough division here. Not a particularly easy stretch to start either. 4 of their first 6 games on the road. A lot of those are East Coast trips as well. Philly, Buffalo, even Washington could be tough with that pass rush against this offensive line. and San Francisco. So I actually have them starting 2-4, and even beating Dallas in the opener is a question mark. Definitely opens up down the stretch, though. So you get a nice run of Chicago, Miami, Seattle at home, who this team tends to play pretty well against. Then I have them losing at Tampa Bay, San Francisco at Arizona, and finishing up pretty strong with New England at home, the Jets at home, a loss at Seattle, and a win versus Arizona at home. So I have them going 8-8 with a win range of 6-10. A very moderate expectation and prediction for this team. An average ranking offense, a pretty average defense, leading to the 16th ranking. I have a very difficult time seeing this team getting back to the Super Bowl. Some of those problems with the quarterback, the offensive line, the depth, banking on way too many kind of unproven pieces to fill in some of those holes that were strengths for this team back when Goff was on that rookie deal, and this was a really loaded roster. It's still a very, very good roster, but I think they're going to have a harder time hiding some of those warts a lot of time. But again, this team has a lot of strengths. I see them winning 8 games this year, going 8-8, and just being pretty solid. And they're definitely, if you want to talk long-term, in a tough place with that Jared Goff contract. They haven't even paid Jalen Ramsey yet. They're only in the beginning of figuring out how they're going to turn this into a sustainable championship caliber team. I think they've figured out how to be a very good team. But I have a hard time seeing them figuring out the championship aspect and winning the conference again here in 2020. So there is your Rams deep dive. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm curious what you think of the ranking after you heard me talk about it. Drop your comments down below. Please do hit that like button as well. Really helps me out. As always, cheers, and we'll see you for the next one. Peace out.